Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to Kabbalah and Coffee. It's great to see everybody this morning. So we have a lot to talk about, including some meditational conversations. But first, I want to talk about the Yetzer Hara. What is the Yetzer Hara? Someone give me a translation of the Yetzer Hara. Evil inclination. Okay, here we go. I'm going to read to you an excerpt from Hayom Yom. This is a thought for each day, a Jewish thought for each day, penned by the Rabbi in the early 1940s. It was taken mainly from his father-in-law's teachings, but he compiled a thought for each day. So this is the thought for the 23rd day of Sivan. That's the thought for that day, which usually falls out somewhere in May or June. But it's relevant for our discussion today. So here's how it reads. In a reply to a personal query in the winter of 1874-1875, my grandfather said to my father, "The Yetzer Hara, the evil impulse, is called animal soul, not because it is necessarily a brute animal. At times, it may be a fox, the most cunning of beasts, and great wisdom is needed to perceive its machinations. At other times, it may clothe itself in the garb of an earnest, straightforward, humble tzaddik, possessing fine traits of character. The animal soul manifests itself in each person according to his individual character. One person may suddenly experience a powerful longing to study Hasidic philosophy, or to meditate deeply on some Hasidic concept. The truth is, however, that this is nothing more than the Yetzer Hara's counsel and the animal soul's machinations to prevent him from engaging in the avodah, in the service of prayer or a similar activity. Take this as a general principle and remember it always. Any matter that is effective towards or actually leads to active avodah, active service of God, and is confronted with opposition of any sort, even the most noble, that opposition is the scheming of the animal soul. My father concluded, until then I had not known that there can be a pious animal soul, let alone a Hasidic animal soul." This is a powerful teaching, and it's something that I think about often, in that, how does evil or negativity confront us? It doesn't always wear a sign or a banner that says, "Hey, I have a really destructive idea. I have an idea that's really bad for you. Why don't you try it?" That's not usually how it works. It usually comes to you, when I say it, the evil impulse, the Yetzer Hara, usually comes to you and I in a way that says this is actually a good thing. In fact, this is a mitzvah. This is a really pious thing. This is a really righteous and just and incredibly spiritual thing to do. And yet, it may not necessarily be the case. In other words, sometimes the animal soul or the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, comes to us and says, do something not good. And we identify it as not good. But if it's trying to get a greater success rate, it's probably better for its percentage to pitch an idea that it can couch in positive terms. Correct? Put yourself in that place. If you were the Yetzer Hara, let's just say, if you were the evil inclination, right, and you were trying to get someone to mess up, to do something wrong, not because you're necessarily evil, but because that's literally the job that God hired you to do. That's the job that you were created to do. So you have no choice. This is your task. Your task is to entice the person into doing something that is not in their best interest. Would you telegraph that and tell them straight up, "Oh, this is not good for you. Try it"? Who's going to buy it? We know what Madison Avenue does to things that are not good, right? It pitches it as the best thing ever, right? Things that are sometimes the most dangerous or unhealthy for a person, the marketers say, "Try it, you'll love it." It'll be great. It'll be amazing. Okay, so we know already that the way to get someone to buy something, to engage in something, to do something that is not only not in someone else's best interest, but not in their own best interests. The only way to do that is by couching it and by positioning it as something positive, something good, something virtuous, something righteous, something even spiritual and mystical. And so here we have a dialogue between two generations of Chabad masters, and one says to the other, you should know that the evil inclination is called an animal soul. Why? Not because it's always a bull in a china shop, always trying to get us to do something devastating and destructive and dangerous, but because sometimes it's called an animal soul because it's like a fox. I don't know about foxes. I haven't researched the actual fox. Is the fox as tricky and cunning as it's made out to be? It is. Good. I'm glad it matches up. So here's the point. Sometimes it's called an animal soul. Why? Because it's like a fox. In that it misrepresents its intentions. It comes to you and says, do this thing. It's going to be good. It's going to be amazing. You'll be very spiritual in this. And in truth, it's not what you're meant to be doing. Why is it? Why are you not meant to be doing it? Sometimes it's not the call of the hour. Sometimes you're meant to be doing one activity, and it has you doing a different activity. And while holy, it's not the right activity. Listen, by raise of hands, or just by, silent nod, internal nod, have any of us around this table ever done something that wasn't what was needed at the time because we had something else important that we needed to do that we didn't want to do? So we put something else in front of that we said was very important, even though we knew that it wasn't. That was a very complicated way of asking the question if we've ever procrastinated by doing other things instead of what we needed to do. Yes? Of course. A true procrastinator says, why should I push it off till tomorrow if I could push it off to next week? Okay, right? So it's about what's really important. And sometimes, as he says in this insight that I read to you before, sometimes what needs to be done by a person is one type of avodah, one type of divine service, and instead of that divine service, the Yetzer Hara / animal soul, the evil inclination / fox soul comes to you and says, no, you got to do this one. You'll be very holy. You'll be very spiritual. Meanwhile, that's not what you're meant to be doing. So how do you know what you're meant to be doing?
Need a wife.
I was going to say, ask me. But look, you kind of know when you know. And if you don't know, it's always good to ask. Ask somebody. Have a third party that you can trust, that's objective, that's not biased by your own, by look, here's the way it works. No one's evil inclination cares about the other one. You with me on this? Okay, there's an Chassidic saying that says, when two people get together, you have two godly souls or two good inclinations against one evil inclination. Why? Because the good inclinations or the godly souls, they care not only about what's good for them in a spiritual way, but they also care about what's good for the other in a spiritual way. Whereas each one's animal soul or evil inclination only cares about the individual, so they're not working together. Which means that if we go to somebody and ask for their objective opinion about something that's on our mind or on our hearts, we shouldn't be concerned that their animal soul or their evil inclination is going to try to bolster ours because it's not working on the same team. Each one works on its own for its own purposes. Again, the reason why I'm saying this is because sometimes something can look very holy, and at its truth, it can be a bit corrupt. It can look on the outside to be very holy, but inside, it's not so holy at all. And in fact, it's a front for a measure of unholiness. And this action that seems holy, and if you poll people in the room, 10 out of 10 will say, that was very righteous. That's a very holy experience. But the person themselves knows deep down inside that it's not such a holy experience, and in fact, it's feeding the animal soul and the evil inclination and pushing a person further away from where they need to be. So now you're probably wondering, what type of activity is it that could look so holy and yet at its core be so not so holy?
Because of timing?
Not because of timing. Because of the magic 3-letter word that we've been discussing throughout this text. Ego. There's a way to do something that's very holy, but do it motivated by ego, and that doesn't bring us closer to God. All it does is it furthers the ego's hold on ourselves, and it keeps us more stuck in I, in self, and more disconnected. Keeps us further away from truth, from others, from community, from connections, from where we need to be. What we're about to do in chapters 12 and 13 of our text is we're about to explore two meditations. One a meditation of joy, and the other a meditation of brokenness. And both are tools in our spiritual advancement. However, both can also be corrupted at their core if it's predicated on ego. It's very easy to have a spiritual pursuit tainted by ego, by self, which then moves the experience away from pure connection to not pure connection at all. So I'll just give you an anecdote. The Baal Shem Tov, as some of you may know, the Baal Shem Tov endeavored to break what had become somewhat of a hierarchy within Jewish communities in Eastern Europe at the time. Baal Shem Tov lived in and around the late 1600s, the early 1700s, and he was all about breaking the hierarchy that had crept into Judaism. In Judaism, historically, there wasn't a hierarchy in scholarship. Famously, Torah scholarship and Torah availability is made available for everybody, irrespective of one's how one was brought up or one's background. It's meant to be democratized. In fact, our sages tell us that the reason why Moses' own children didn't inherit the mantle of leadership, it wasn't Moses' children who led after Moses' passing. It was Joshua, an outsider. You see, the priesthood, Aaron, the kahuna, to be a Kohen, that is hereditary. But Torah, the crown of Torah, is not hereditary. Moses' own children, Moses represents Torah leadership. His children were not the next leaders. And our sages tell us there's a powerful lesson in that. And that is, it's not about the family. It's about personal dedication to Torah. If you study, you'll have it. If you don't, you're not going to have it. There's no magic formula. It's not which family I was born into, which schooling I went to. It doesn't matter. The past is irrelevant. The question is today. If we dedicate ourselves to Torah, you can learn whatever you want. You can learn 5 books of Moses. You can learn Tanakh, the rest of scriptures. You can learn Talmud. Today you can learn anything. Everything's available in English or whatever language you want. Sefaria, did I mention Sefaria recently? Yeah? Not in this class, right? No. Different class. There's an app you can get on your phone. Sefaria, Sefaria. The whole of Torah at your fingertips. Whatever you want. Look it up. It's an app or it's a website. Democratizing in an unprecedented way the study of Torah. So Torah is freely available. So why am I mentioning Torah and its freely availability? How did I get to this? Thank you. The Baal Shem Tov. So thank you, Sandrine. Just making sure somebody was listening. So so that's the way it always was, and that's the way, thank God, it is today. But there was a glitch in history where, because of various things that were going on on a societal level, so the Jewish community was getting a bit hierarchical, where there were the scholars and the lay people, and the scholars felt that the lay people shouldn't be hanging out with them. And so they said, we have our own synagogues and you have your own synagogues. Don't mix the synagogues. These synagogues are reserved for the Talmidei Chachamim, for the Torah scholars. The Baal Shem Tov came and he broke down the hierarchy. And he said, and the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, continued this idea: if you study Torah and it's all about ego, because look, I'm a scholar and you're not a scholar, then your pages of Talmud study are worthless. On the spiritual realms, the Torah study doesn't ascend past this world of action. It doesn't ascend to the higher spiritual realms. It doesn't have the effect that Torah study is meant to have. In other words, you can be doing something positive, and you can be a master of Torah scholarship, and yet at its core it can be corrupt. Why? Due to our good friend, ego. Because it's now not about God's Torah. Why am I studying Torah? So that I feel superior, not even so that I have the knowledge, so that I can feel superior to another human being. So where's God in the picture? That's a complete ego and power trip. Don't bring God into this matter. This has nothing to do with God and God's Torah. Torah was only given to bring peace into the world. If Torah is ever used to divide, you know there's corruption there. That's a rule of thumb. If anyone is taking a Torah scroll and using it as a club to bash someone else over the head with, metaphorically of course, or practically, definitely, but even metaphorically, you know one thing, there's something rotten at the core. It's not kosher. There's something wrong there. Because Torah was only given to bring peace, to bring people together, and to bring us closer to Hashem. If it's not doing that, then there's not a flaw in Torah, it's a flaw in what that person or those people are doing. So if Torah is all about Torah study, that avoda of Torah study, that service of Torah study is all about my knowledge and my brilliance and me feeling better about myself and being able to look at someone else and say, I know more than you, and therefore I'm superior to you, and you're inferior, and you need to ask me the questions because I have the answers, etc. If that's ever what Torah does to a person, that's not called avoda. That's not service of God. That's service of self. And people have different forms of service of self. Some people come out straight up and say, worship me, like Pharaoh, or like others, right? And some people say, look at how much Torah scholarship I have. Don't you want to honor me? But it's the same thing. One is the animal soul or the evil inclination showing its true colors, and the other one is one that's dressed up like a fox. So one is more like an ox, where you could see what it is. It's a brute animal. And the other one is like a fox, pretending that it's not, but it really is. The point here is, it's not about condemning. It's not about criticizing. It's really about understanding, as a cautionary tale, how careful we have to be to make sure that our spiritual pursuits are truly free of self and really about the cause, really about the purpose. In other words, it's not just in selfish activities that our ego can be manifest, but even in spiritual activities, our ego can be manifest. Which means that if you want to be careful, because our text, I have new copies today because we have new chapters. So our text, which is all about how to get along with others. And at the core we said, the difference between Midian, right, and Moses, or the difference between unholiness and holiness, is the difference between ego, or yesh, and selflessness, or bittul. If you want to be careful to make sure that you're not stuck in a place of yesh, of ego, it's not going to help necessarily to do something spiritual. That's not going to be the answer necessarily. Because you can do something spiritual and still be stuck in the same ego place as when you're doing something overtly or clearly selfish. Does that make sense? Yes? In other words, doing something that looks spiritual doesn't constitute breaking out of ego in and of itself. It could, but it also might not constitute that. With that in mind, that's an introduction to chapters 12 and 13, the next two chapters that we're going to study. We're going to study two chapters that appear kind of a break from the narrative. They talk about two forms of meditation, one that leads to joy and excitement, the other one that leads to a broken heart, and a contrition of soul and spirit. And then in chapter 14, he's going to say, both of these apparently spiritual meditations and pursuits could be corrupted by ego. That's where we're going with this. I'm just giving you the map of where we're headed. But now, let's jump into chapter 12, and now the meditation of joy and excitement. So please take and pass. Please take and pass. Sure. Okay, questions or comments so far on the first intro?
I have a question.
Yes.
So the extreme of what you're talking about would be like cult leaders. A lot of times you find cult leaders have a lot of knowledge, but then they're like seducing people in the cult or whatever.
Correct.
So they use that as a pretext to kind of feed their ego.
Correct.
But what about if you are, you say something wise to someone and it transforms their life, or you do a good deed and you feel really good about it, and you're really like, you're thinking about it a lot, and you know that like, it kind of feels like you're feeding your ego.
Right.
Like how do you change your thinking on it so that you know that it's coming from a really pure place?
So I think like this, it's a very good question. So I think that for us to believe that we're going to be ego free and do something good and have it have a positive effect and not feel any measure of satisfaction from that might be a little bit too lofty. But what we need to do is identify which part of that service is the holy part and which part is the part that still needs improvement. And we should never think that the part that's feeding ego is the spiritual part. So that and when we know that, then it will never lead us to feeding that as the first objective, as the primary objective. In other words, if we do something positive and we get that positive feedback and it feels good, and so to the point that we want to do more to feel good, but we keep on wanting to feel good, and then it becomes only about us, that's where it can become corrupted. It's a slippery slope to potentially to a corruption, or being at least stuck in our own self, so that whatever we're doing is about us. If we're dissatisfied with the ego piece of it, at least we're on the right track, if that makes sense. There's like identifying it and knowing it and being careful with it. That's the first step. To think that we're going to be ego free, we're not angels. We still have that animal soul no matter what we do. But the point is to identify it and not pretend like it doesn't exist, or that it's 100% kosher all the way through. Does that make sense? Yeah.
What about critiquing other Jews for not following Torah? Does that fit into the corruption of the Torah, or it's more Lashon Hara, which is like the same thing?
But why critique if not you? I'm saying, why should one critique if one can encourage with love? I would say there's another approach, which is
not there?
okay.
You're talking about
I would say still love is always the best way. We always have the greatest influence that we have is always from a place of closeness and connection, as opposed to a place from the outside in. I think the old school model was, someone does something that the family didn't like, they cut them out of the family, they said Kaddish for them. That was the old school. I don't think that ever worked. I don't think the ostracizing ever worked. Again, I'm not being critical of what they did back in the day in the shtetl. I don't think that ever worked.
I did it in Brooklyn, in my own family.
Fine. I was being nice. By going shtetl. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be nice. What I'm saying is that there was a mindset of, we have to express how serious something is, and therefore we have to take a stance, and we can't let it slide, and it's not okay, and whatever. But in my opinion, I don't think that approach ever worked.
Yeah, but my question is more, does that relate to like a corruption of the Torah to critique?
I think like this. I think that we can speak passionately about something, and we can encourage with love. The critiquing, I don't know if it gets personal. I would say that's where it gets a little bit corrupt. It's about the idea and the concept, and you're passionate about it, and you're speaking about it, and But framing it in a positive way, I think that's a good thing. Listen. The best model that I can think of as we're having this conversation is the Rebbe and how the Rebbe spoke about issues.
Right.
Very passionate, sometimes critiquing an issue, but not a person. Never getting personal. It wasn't ever about calling someone out. It was about an issue. This is an important issue. Let's put more attention on it. And in general, that was I would say the more rare approach. The more common approach was a positive campaign. It's not like why isn't everyone putting on tefillin? Like tefillin is so important. What's going on? What's right? It wasn't a negative thing. It was a positive thing. Let's make a tefillin campaign. Let's make a mezuzah campaign. Let's make a Shabbat candle lighting campaign. It's a wordy campaign right there. But it was all about doing a positive campaign. It's not focusing on the negative or the critique. People respond to positivity. Maybe it's a generational thing, but the Rebbe knew his generation. He knew how we needed to be told things. Does it mean if somebody critiques, then it's corrupt? I know that's your question. I know your question is: does it mean automatically it's corrupt? It's hard for me to say, in a theoretical situation, that yes, that is, or that's not corrupt. The general framework should be less about the criticism, more about the positive, and it shouldn't be about ego. It shouldn't be about self. If we ever are offended and want to call someone out because we're offended, then it means it's not about the issue. It means it's about us. When you speak about even parenting, effective parenting we know today is not from a place of ego. So my kid's throwing a tantrum in the store, so I get very upset at the child. Why? Because I look bad. That's not the right way to parent. From a place of, I felt embarrassed, therefore I'm going to react to that and make a parenting move because I felt somehow whatever. It was about me. That's not effective parenting. Effective parenting is about the child. What does the child need to hear? What does the child need to learn? Not about me. It has nothing to do with me. Effective parenting is, I'm using parenting as an example because parenting is chinuch, is education, and that applies across the board. Parents to children, teachers, mentors to students, etc. It's across the board. Friends to friends. It should always be done from a place of love, care, and concern about the other person, never about self. So I think a lot of times criticism comes from a place of, when it's harsh, it means because somehow it's triggered something within us. And that's, I'm going to say in my opinion, but it's also sourced in Jewish sources as well as other sources today, that's never a valid reason to educate. If somebody's speaking next to you in shul, in synagogue, and you can't concentrate on your prayers, and you kind of unload on them, shh, what are you doing? It's a synagogue, stop talking. Yeah? Are you right? Yeah. Is that right? No. Why? Because it's not about not talking in shul. It's about you got offended. That's not a valid. Criticism is only meant to improve the other. No one ever improved because they felt somebody else was upset at them. Okay, that's a big statement. Let me back off that general statement. In general, people are more open to being introspective and listening to guidance when they feel that the person that's telling it to them has their best interests in mind and cares about them. Not that they're angry or they're upset. If somebody criticizes, if you're being shouted at or yelled at, criticized, so either two natural human reactions. Either you cower and you just let the blows land in somewhat of a protected fashion, correct? Or you lash back to protect yourself. Those are two options, right? So either you're quiet and you take it, but it doesn't influence you. It just creates some sort of trauma, right, on some level. Or you say, you're criticizing me. You're telling me something. Are you kidding me? How about you? And you turn it back against them. The point is, it's not effective. It's not effective because it's not coming from the right place. The same verse that says in Torah and Leviticus, Hocheach tochiach es amisecha, rebuke your friend, also says, do not hate your brother in your heart. And in proximity it says, love your fellows yourself. And the sages, our sages, note the juxtaposition. I wish I had the text open. I mean, we could find it, but...
And yet in the Haggadah it says wash your kids' teeth.
But that's, so the Rebbe understands it differently. You're right. It seems like the wicked son, but as the Rebbe explains it, you tell the wicked child, the wayward child, you tell them, had you been there, you wouldn't have been redeemed. The implication being, today, you're part of it. I know it's not written clearly, but that's how the Rebbe understands it. That's how a Chabadnik understands it. It's a positive message, not a distancing message. Not, you troublemaker, you nudnik, get out of here. It's...
Aren't you fortunate?
Yeah, you're in this generation. Back then, it was a little bit dicey. Today, you're part of the crew. So again, let me just wrap this point up. Torah says to rebuke your fellow, to criticize. But in which context? From a place of love. Without any measure of hate in your heart. Which means it can come from a place of self. It has to be an egoless experience, completely out of concern for the other. Let me paint you two scenarios. A child who hears let's say you're having guests over. You're working all day. You have very important guests coming over to your house for dinner. And you've been working all day. You come home from work, and your children, your child is home from school already for a little bit before you, and you walk in the house, and you have a very short amount of time to get everything ready for the guests to come over, and you see that their room is a mess. You told them 2 days ago, yesterday, this morning, to make sure the room is clean. We have company coming over. You told them, and it's not clean. You're very upset. What are you going to do? That's right. I told you to clean up your room. How come it's not clean? You got to clean it right now, right? That's a very generous way of saying it. Right? It could be worse than that. Here's the deal. That's not an educational moment. That's not a pedagogically sound moment. There's no education or mentoring happening there. You're unloading on the child, but it's not an educational moment. Education happens, or it's not a moment of influence. Even if they'll clean up the room now, you haven't influenced them from the inside out. You've imposed something on them from the outside in. You haven't transformed them from the inside out. The difference between wisdom and a light bulb is that when you shut off the lights, the room is dark. The goal of education is that even when the teacher or the parent leaves the room, the light stays on. No light stays on when things are imposed from the outside. It's like the light. The moment they leave, it's a mess again. I'm not saying we magically transform behavior either. It's about a person choosing it. The other model is that you don't say anything in that moment, or however that scenario plays out. It's a tricky scenario because the guests are coming in a half an hour, so you got to make a plan. But there is a way in which the communication happens in a way that the child realizes that this is a value that's important, and I'm not upset because I'm not going to look good, or it's going to look bad, or what are the guests going to say, or I can't believe you didn't listen to me. So again, it's about ego. It's not about that. It's about them. When it's about them, they'll listen. When it's about you, you've already lost them. That's a truth in education. It's a truth in communication.
Wait, so what do you say?
Sorry, gotta run. Next question. It's getting too practical. It takes time. It takes time to develop. It also takes trust. It takes a different approach. It takes us. It's a teachable moment. It's a teachable moment also in how we react. It's not about the room anymore. It's really not about the room. It's about when things don't go the way we've planned. What do we do about that? You say, okay, I see you haven't done it. No problem. Let's get it done now. We have guests coming over. Let's make it happen. How can I help? Or let's whatever it is. And then afterwards you have a conversation from a calm place. Nothing, listen, we're not angels. Like I mentioned before, we're not perfect tzaddikim. We're never going to be free of ego. But if we ask ourselves the question, what's more effective? What is educational? To yell, shout, and scream is not educational. No one's ever influenced by someone feeling that their ego got hurt. That has nothing to do with me. You're dealing with some stuff in your own. You're shouting at me because you got offended. Fine. Or because you're upset. Great. Nothing to do with me. You tell me that you care about me and you have something in my best interest in mind, now we can have a conversation.
Sometimes it is meant to offend you,
What is?
what the other person says to you.
I would say that's probably not healthy either.
How you react to that.
Yeah, so reaction is one thing. Let's talk about the one who's giving. The one who's receiving, we'll have to save that for another conversation. But the one who's giving, the right question was about critique. Is critique valid or invalid? The answer is, there's a way to influence that's effective. And there's a way to influence that's less effective. The most effective way is through love, care, and concern, where it's about them, not about ourselves. When it's about ourselves and how we're offended or how we're upset or how we've taken it, it's not going to be as effective. And the reason is because it's about our ego. Are we there to serve the other? Are we there to help the other? Or are we there to, to just vent in how we feel about something? So it's a bit of a different experience. So is there ever a valid form of critique? The answer is yes, but it's predicated on their best interests. Yeah.
Yeah. You kind of answered what I was going to say, but let me see if I can put it into words.
I feel like if I keep on talking enough, eventually.
If what you say, then if you're not upset and you're not angry or your emotions haven't been raised in that way, then more likely that what comes out is going to be beneficial to the other person.
Exactly. Very, very good way of saying it. If you haven't been emotionally triggered, then that comes with the corollary will probably be that whatever you're saying is really about that. It's for their benefit. Because it's not about you.
And then to take it one step further, that if those upset emotions are not triggered, that leaves space for the godly soul to come out, reach out to the other.
Correct. And the rational mind to articulate a way how to actually benefit the other. No, again, if you're in synagogue and somebody's speaking next to you and you're getting upset because you can't pray, you can't concentrate, and you unload on that person, are you justified? Who knows? Maybe. But that's not that.
Multiple seats in the synagogue.
Yeah.
I think that before you had said, we talk about the receiver another time. It feels like what we're talking about has got to be relational. That there's two people involved in it, and I think I love the way that you're describing it, and I think that really is what we strive for. It sort of presupposes that there is a that there is a relationship, there's a trust. That thinking in education, you have one teacher who creates this kind of culture and then goes into the next grade, and a criticism is a criticism, i.e., I got it wrong, I'm going to get a bad grade for it, or just tell me what it is that I need to do as well. I think that relationship is very key, as
Correct.
well as the culture. That it's not about what we always say. It's not you. It's what you have done, and so on. But there has to be a culture where the receiver isn't automatically taking it as something is bad, something is wrong.
Right.
With it.
Right.
And that trust takes. I think as we're getting at that trust takes a while to establish.
I think the greatest way to that's very well stated. I think the greatest way to create that culture and trust is if it's really genuinely coming from that place.
Yeah.
Because children, more than anyone, can sniff out the truth. And if you're pretending that you're not offended, but you are, or you're pretending that you're not upset, but you are, if you're following the script because that's how you were taught to follow a script, but really it's about you, the children are not going to feel that safety. They're not going to feel that trust. If it's genuinely about them, it's not about you. You're there to educate them. You're there. Why would I get triggered? It's not about me. I'm there to educate these children. I'm there to be a role model, to educate and to guide and to mentor and to help them where they need. So why should I get triggered? It doesn't make any sense. Same issue with a parent, right? So the kid has a meltdown in a store. So why should I get worked up about that? Doesn't make sense. So two people should be screaming. So they're screaming. I should also be screaming. I mean, you break it down logically, it doesn't make any sense. But I know in the moment we get caught up in it. But yeah, if we have the tools, not the tools, sounds too fancy. If we are genuinely concerned and loving and caring about the other person, and it's not about us, I think that shines through. And that helps create that culture. But you're right. It requires that culture. And by the way, if that culture is not there, to criticize when it's not going to have an effect, it's like the man screaming at the cloud. What is that? Old man shakes fist at cloud meme. You know that meme? Yes? Simpsons? Yeah. It's not, what's the point?
And of course, looking
I feel like I need to get it. Keep on talking. I want to get a copy of the Chumash because I want to read the verses. But I'm listening as I get it.
So you establish it.
I'm listening with love. Hold on.
With love, but you went away, and now my ego and everything.
My heart is there.
Everything got upside down.
Turned his back on you, but I wouldn't point that out.
That's right.
No, I try to watch sideways. It's just I don't want to trip.
I'm
Yeah.
not going to say, but my ego got hurt. Now I forgot what I was going to say.
Culture.
Oh my gosh, so weird.
You open
You open to the page?
Yeah.
Now it's about you, huh?
No. I'm listening. I'm listening. I know. I'm with you. We're on the same page. But I'm listening. Go.
I forgot what I was going to say.
Okay. It'll come back to you. Let me know. Take a look. This is, or don't take a look. Take a listen. This is Leviticus chapter 19, verse 17. You should not hate your brother in your heart. You should continually rebuke your fellow, but you should not bear a sin. That's what it says. Loisisnas achicha belvavecha. Do not hate your brother in your heart. That's one half of the verse. Same verse. Second half of the verse says, Hocheach tochiach es amisecha. Rebuke your friend. Velo sisa lavchet, and you will not bear a sin on his account.
What is the citation again?
1917. Leviticus 19:17. Oh, and then the next verse says, do not take revenge or bear a grudge against your fellow, and love your fellow as yourself. Those are the two verses in proximity. But the first verse that I mentioned says, do not hate your brother, rebuke your friend. What does it mean? Rebuke should not be coming from a place of hate. Straight up. It's right there. The juxtaposition, it's right there. Do not hate your brother, and rebuke your friend. What does it mean? Rebuke is only valid, it's only kosher when it doesn't come from a place of hate. A prerequisite for healthy corrective guidance is when it's not about your anger or your whatever. Really, when it's not about you, when it's about the other.
In terms of what I would say about the room to a child is I would say to them, you can keep your word. Let's go in there and let's figure out how to clean this up right now because people are coming. And as a teacher, I'm working with parents who have taken positive parenting to an extreme now. So we have to figure out how to get it back balanced because there's not enough. There's a lot of hesed, and but not enough gevurah. And the issue is that the parents, this idea and this that we want to educate the kids and be connected with the kids is so important. But what they're doing is they're overcorrecting to make sure that their kid is comfortable all the time and never feels that their actions have impacted another. So what I'm dealing with is kids that are truly obnoxious. And, right?
But it's a strength.
And someone needs to straight up tell them. And the kid needs to feel where they have affected another person. And when my daughter rolled her eyes at me, I'm like, that is not okay, that's obnoxious, you're not doing it, and bringing in a little bit of, let's be clear, this is not allowed, you know. So positive parenting has its place, but then we need to come back a little bit and be very clear about what things affect other people.
So the same verse, thank you for sharing that, the same verse that says, don't hate your brother in your heart, also says, rebuke your fellow. So it's a balance. So it's not if you don't hate, so it's all good. It does talk about rebuking, but the prerequisite for rebuking is that it's not coming from a place of your ego and your, how it bothered you. It's about what's best for them. In other words, it's really about them being a mensch, raising a mensch, and to be a mensch, this is what is good, is going to be good for you and good for the world. So it's about, it's focused. I hear you. Yeah. I can see that. Okay.
Rabbi,
so yeah.
I came across this idea of this concept from Brene Brown last year called consequential parenting. Have you heard about this? Where it's just you set it up ahead of time. If you do this, then that will happen.
So it's emotion. It's free of emotion. It's
exactly.
It's not.
You set up the parameters ahead of time, and that's it. There's
no
arguing about it.
Right.
And it's to sort of get that
is.
emotion out of it.
Right.
If you don't clean up your room, then you're going to lose your cell phone.
Yeah.
Right. And there's no argument.
Yeah.
That might not always work. When my daughter was a very messy teenager, she wanted to go spend the night with somebody, and I said, okay, clean up your room, and we go. And about an hour later, I walked by and it was spotless. She conned her brother into doing it.
Oh. But it got done.
Smart girl.
Very industrious. That's a great story.
Or they're gonna say,
Yeah, but I hear,
find a clean room.
Yeah, I see that approach. I see with my own kids also. It used to be somewhat of a challenge with, all the different tasks, whatever. We created a checklist. And so it's not necessarily with consequence or whatever, but a checklist. Their expectations are stated and they check it off.
It's in the kitchen. Yeah.
It's in the kitchen. You've seen it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look at that. So yeah, we have
you
a
don't have a lot of gold stars, are you?
I know, I'm a few weeks behind the my checklist now. Yeah, okay.
So what if they don't see it?
I'm not sure. Leigh's in charge of that part. I bring Leigh into that.
No, but what's helpful about that approach?
I probably shouldn't take credit for the checklist either. I said we. I meant Leigh set that up.
It's a tactic, right? But it's the way you implement the strategy. But what's helpful about it, I found intriguing, is that it's there, it's visible, it's present. They see it. It's at the center of the family home, and it's consistent across all the kids. Different kids have different tasks, but everybody's on the checklist.
Right.
So it's not about. It's about how do you help to make shalom bayit.
Yeah, it's what we do. What if they don't do it? Yeah, ask. I still didn't have an answer as I started that rhetorical question. Yeah.
That actually goes to what Dan Ariely was talking about with the helping the families save for money, because it's one of these hidden things. So, your chore in a way sometimes is a hidden thing. So it does help everybody see this is what I'm bringing to the
So you're saying to put it in view, it helps exactly. Yeah, it helps. It makes it concretized and okay.
One more question.
Yeah, sure.
We're talking a lot about parenting and education.
Sure.
What if you're two adults and you're not in that culture?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question.
And
I think. Yeah, sure.
And you are offended, and it is about you, and someone's doing that. And it triggers you. I mean, you're human.
Right, yeah.
So?
I would say that if that's the case, that person didn't communicate in a way that is coming from their ego. So the best way for us to be is not to mirror that back at the other, but to recognize that although I've been hurt by it, that's a failing, that's they don't have the tools, or they're not expressing healthy communication. That's on them, that's not on me. So I don't need to get even hurt by that, theoretically.
That's the
Theoretically, right? Yeah. I shouldn't get hurt. I always revert back to what Rabbi Label Wolf from Australia, the wonderful Kabbalist from Australia, once said at one of our annual celebrations. This was a number of years ago at the Park Tavern. And he said, when somebody is shouting at you, it means that they're in pain.
True.
And he says it's no different than if somebody's lying on the ground and their arm is bleeding and they're shouting and screaming. Are you going to be offended? Are you going to get upset? No, you're going to run to their help. You're going to think about, you're going to feel compassion, and you're going to try to help them.
But it's still hurt.
When somebody, well, hold on, it's a meditation, right? It's a reframing. It's a reframing. When somebody's shouting at you or somebody's saying something hurtful to you, you and I have to know, even if it's hard to remind ourselves, we have to know that what it means is that person is not in a healthy place. In other words, or they're in a place of pain. So instead of me getting upset that they're in pain, I should try to replace that with compassion. And that compassion can help, number one, neutralize the situation, but also help them. Because it's really not about me in that situation. When somebody's ego is out of control and they're unloading on me, it's really not about me, it's about them.
No, I understand that.
You're asking how to not feel hurt?
No, how to react if it's a continuous kind of thing.
Well,
like
with
in your family, for example.
I hear you. I feel like it's hard to give specific. I think it's going to be hard to give specific guidance without a very specific conversation, which should happen not in this context. But the general notion is that is coming from a place. We don't have to make that about us. That could be about them, and we should have compassion. It says in Kabbalah, there's a verse that says, I don't remember where the verse is. The verse says something about Jacob redeeming Abraham. Yaakov pada et Avram. Jacob redeems Abraham. And it says, Kabbalah explains, what does it mean that Jacob redeems Abraham? Abraham, Avram is chesed. And Yaakov, Jacob is Tiferet. Right, so chesed, gevurah, Tiferet. 1, 2, 3. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. So, or if you're looking at it, your side, right? So it's chesed, gevurah, Tiferet, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. So when we're feeling, when the love is missing, because we're feeling a little bit of the gevurah, we're feeling a little bit of the anger, right? Gevurah we're going to loosely call anger at this point. We're feeling hurt, anger, whatever. The way to neutralize that is with tiferet, is with compassion. When we feel compassion, recognizing that person who's doing something to hurt me must be in such pain to hurt me, a loved one, a family member, right? That they should hurt me, or a parent should hurt a child. Can you imagine how much pain, what negative place they must be in to be even doing this? I should feel compassion for them for being in such a state, and that can bring about, that can reawaken, can redeem the love for that person and move it away from that, from the gevurah, from the antagonistic place toward them. So this is a way in which Kabbalah says Yaakov, Jacob redeems Abraham, i.e., compassion can bring back the love. Is it a magic formula? It's not a magic formula. Is it an approach and a meditation? Absolutely.
I have a suggestion.
Yeah.
It's a very simple trick. An unmet emotion's like a weed. It's going to grow unless it's addressed. And it's basically if someone says, I'm hurt, or you're not spending enough time with me. The trick is real simple. Repeat it. I'm not spending enough time with you. And shut up. Let the person talk. And then repeat. And ask open-ended questions. That's what I do. My wife doesn't know that I'm doing it to her all the time. But
if she's listening to the recording, she knows now. I hear you. Yeah, that's a good way to create that dialogue. No, 100%. Yeah, no, it's a great way to create that dialogue. Yeah. Okay, let's jump into chapter 12. So all of this is really about understanding the dangers of ego, even in situations that otherwise seem so holy and cloaked with halos. The reality is that if ego is involved, it can really undermine that situation, that otherwise holy situation. Okay, chapter 12. Here we have, again, it's going to seem like a totally different topic, but it's not, because even this can be filled with ego, as we'll get to in chapter 14. But let's talk about a meditation about God and about creation and about light and about joy and excitement. It is well known that there are two approaches in avoda, two approaches in divine service. Number one, divine service through joy and excitement. And number two, divine service through humility. In this chapter, we will discuss the first. Some of those words are bracketed. They're not in the original Hebrew, but that's an accurate meaning and understanding of the text. Joy in avoda, so joy in divine service, having joy toward God, toward purpose, etc., can be attained by understanding and meditating upon the greatness of God, which is manifest in the creation ex nihilo. Okay, let's talk about meditation. I wrote this in the email, but I just want to repeat it and emphasize it. In Eastern meditation, the goal is, in many forms of Eastern meditation, the objective is to empty the mind, to clear the mind. Jewish meditation is very different. It's not about emptying the mind, it's about focusing the mind on a specific idea to the point that it generates an emotion. Everyone can do this, and you have done this. If you've ever been in the car, driving on your commute, and you've thought about that thing, that comment that your friend or family member or coworker said last week, that at that time was semi-offensive, but you think about it now again because you have time, because you're in traffic, and you think about it more, and you're like, you know what, that was actually really offensive. And in fact, it's not the first time they said that. And you start bridging together a bunch of different things that they've done to you that have been offensive. And now you're getting angry and you're gripping the steering wheel and you're getting all upset at them, and they're not even in the car with you. That's meditation. That's Jewish meditation. Not in a good way, but that means that you're focusing on an idea to the point that it creates an emotion. That's meditation. The definition of Jewish meditation is focusing intensely, concentrating very well on an idea until it produces a commensurate or a fitting, an appropriate emotion. If you focus on how much somebody is hurting you or is wronging you, then the appropriate emotion is going to be getting upset about it. If the meditation is on the greatness of God, which is what we're about to develop now, if that's the meditation, then the appropriate emotion that will inevitably result from that, it will work. If you put your mind to it, what will result is a feeling of joy and excitement and a yearning and a desire to connect with something greater than self. It's going to be the result. Concentrated thought and focused thought leads to emotions. They produce emotions. That's the way the system works. Kabbalah is very clear about this. In the hierarchy of the powers of the soul, we have the 3 intellectual, which we mentioned a moment ago, and the 7 emotional. No, we mentioned the emotional ones, the chesed, gvura, tiferet, but there's 3 intellectual ones that stand above those. Chachma, Bina, and Dat. And Dat is the power of meditation. Dat, Jewish meditation. Not clearing the mind, but focusing the mind, laser focused on one idea. And it's hard because it's easy to get distracted. Right? If we put our mind to focus on a concept, it's very easy that our mind will be distracted and we'll find ourselves thinking about, maybe 1,000 other things. But with practice, like any muscle, with practice we get better and better and better at it. Which is why in the Hasidic tradition we study these types of texts every single morning before praying, for half an hour or an hour and a half before praying. And then when you pray, you take one of the ideas that you've studied and keep it in your mind and focus on it. And that becomes the emotion with which you pray. And it's a daily activity. But the more we do it, whether we do it every day for an hour and a half, or whether we do it every day for 10 minutes, or 5 minutes, or whether we do it once a week on Shabbat morning for a half an hour, or 15 minutes, or 5 minutes. The more we do it, the more practice we have, the more likely we are to be effective at it. And when I say it, let's stop speaking in vague terms. What I mean is, the more practice that we have with meditation, with, again, the Jewish form of meditation, which is focusing on an idea until we feel something, the more we do it, the more we will be, the more skilled we will be at doing it, and the more effective the process will be. So again, if you focus, if you meditate, if you focus the mind on how that person offended you, you're going to feel upset at that person. You can get angry. If you focus on, let's say, a kindness that a person did for you or to you, right? If it's a gratitude meditation, and you focus on all the things that a person has done or people have done for your benefit, so you'll feel an emotion of gratitude. If you focus on God, as we'll describe in chapter 12, that will produce an appropriate emotion. The point is, whatever we think about creates an emotion. And by the way, if we focus on emptiness, that creates an emotion of emptiness, which I think is something that we know today. Yeah.
Okay, so when you do your morning prayers, when you do your prayers, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. You start off with, page, 3 pages, 18 pages, whatever it is.
Right.
You start in one area and you end in the other. So I'm seeing now, if you're focusing on a hurt that somebody did to you, that's where you begin. But as you start to really focus on that, you may hopefully see that, as we just talked about, that person is actually calling out in pain. And then if you focus on what the cause of that is, by the time you're done with this meditation, you're now focusing on compassion, if you will.
Yeah.
This is where I can help change this so it's not so uncomfortable for me, but also it's not so uncomfortable for this person as well.
Yeah, yeah. And the prayers are not necessarily trained toward working through the experience of hurt, but right, the concept of working, correct, exactly, right, there's a process, a beginning, middle, and end, well stated. We had a course that we taught last spring, a 6-week JLI course called With All My Heart, and the audio archives are available on SoundCloud and on the podcast, Knowledge on the Deeper Side. So it's freely, it's available to listen to. We explained in that course how prayer is a progression from waking up in the morning and feeling self, feeling ego, to working through the various steps to feel less self and feel more about God. And that's the arc of prayer. It's about really letting go of self and recognizing the truth of who we are and where we are.
That's what I'm saying with meditation, it's letting go of yourself.
Correct. Correct.
The other person.
Right, and that's where the parallel comes in. That's a practical application of that overarching objective of prayer. Prayer is about moving us out of a space of self and into a space of greater than self. And that helps when it comes to personal interactions and every area of life. Okay.
Say something
Sure.
real quick. You were talking about meditating on emptiness, and it can lead to you feeling empty on the inside, but if we're looking at what the teachings of the Buddha said, he never told anyone to meditate on emptiness.
No, I wasn't referring to that at all.
Yeah, like...
No, I was referring to, I know I said that very quickly. What I meant was meditating on vanity, on things that are of no value. And I didn't mean in the process of, I wasn't talking about Eastern meditation at all. Right. I was saying how our society puts in front of us, look at this, focus on that, buy this, and what is it? It's empty. That's what I was referring to. I was saying a lot of us, if we're not meditating on things of value, what we're focusing our minds on are things of empty value, things that don't really have value. And that can only create within ourselves a feeling of, that's what life's about? Right. I ran after this, I bought that thing, and now what? And it creates a feeling of emptiness in our hearts because what we've been pursuing, what we've been thinking about are things that don't have substance. I wasn't referring to emptying the mind. I understand the value, by the way, in meditations that are about emptying the mind, because the mind can be very distracting. I was just saying there's a Jewish form of meditation. The Jewish form of meditation is about focusing on things until emotions are born. And then when I mentioned the empty, it wasn't about the emptying the mind, although, again, I understand where the words run together, but it was really about the meditations of vanity, of non-eternally substantive things that then foster just a sense of dissatisfaction with life itself. Like, what is this about?
Right, I was just clear, because a lot of people get confused when they hear about terms like emptiness, and it seems like something's hollow or it's missing. The way he described emptiness was more like things are empty of an independent origination. Basically what he means is that things are empty of having their own being that's separate from everything else.
Nice.
So a word emptiness technically means oneness, because everything
Right.
is more or less kind of like connected through like a unified oneness.
Right.
So I'm not separate from you. If I view myself as being separate from you, I'm looking at an independent origination.
Right.
We are not connected. I'm
Right.
separate from you.
It's looking at the
separate.
outside and not on the truth inside.
Right. So
Nice.
things are devoid of their own independence from everything else. You're
Got
connected
it.
to the earth. You're connected to gravity. You're connected to God. Everything is nothing is empty that has that independence from everything else. Nothing is isolated.
Got it.
So when a
Cool.
person is meditating on emptiness, they're meditating technically on oneness. Is kind of like what is probably the best description of that.
Cool.
A lot of people have a misnomer about that because they hear the term and it seems really negative. It's like, ooh, emptiness. That's not what I want to be, but it really technically means like oneness. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Okay, so let's jump back into this. So this is going to be on, and the truth is, thank you for sharing that, because this meditation that we're about to study, that we're about to jump into, is really about also the oneness and the source, and how the source is manifest in everything. So let's jump in. So he says, again, the premise here is that this meditation is going to lead to a sense of joy and excitement. And how does this happen? So it's about meditating upon the greatness of God, which is manifest in the creation ex nihilo, creating something from nothing, which is the process by which this universe is created. So A, in the first place, the creation of something from nothing is a wondrous thing that human beings cannot even truly imagine. Imagine creating something from absolute nothingness. It's impossible to imagine. Right? It's like the famous joke, the scientists come to God and say, God, we don't need you anymore to create man. We know how to do this. God says, come on. Like, no, legit. We can create human beings. We don't need you. We can even do it from the earth, like you created Adam. God's like, show me. So the scientists bend down, pick up some earth. God says, get your own earth. Right? So creating something from nothing means you walk into an empty room, like nothing. Not that you took something and you manipulate it into something else.
That's like a formation, not really.
Yeah, that's form.
Yeah.
That's called Yetzirah.
Yeah.
That's not Bria. That's not creation. In Hebrew, it's a different form. If you take wood and make it into a chair, you created a chair. Yeah, I don't know about that. You took paint, right? Bob Ross. This is not a knock against Bob. Bob and I are tight. Nonetheless, you're taking something and you're reconfiguring it on a canvas. We call it art. We call it creation, but it's not pure. It's not the same league of creation as God's creation, which is something from absolute abject nothingness. So that itself is a wondrous thing. In other words, that's mind-blowing. To go from nothing to something, anything that's in our imagination of creation is something from something. You had something, now you have something a little bit different, modified, whatever, but you started off with something. To start off with nothing is a wondrous thing. It's mind-boggling. He continues, moreover, creation of something from nothing is not the same as the relation between cause and effect. Okay, so we're about to jump into a classic Kabbalistic contrast. The 3 C's. Classic, work with me here. Classic Kabbalistic contrast between Yesh Me'ayin and Ila Va'olol. These are very important terms. Yesh Me'ayin is something from nothing, which is what we're talking about. Ila Va'olol is cause and effect, which means something from something. Cause and effect means that there was a cause that produced an effect, but you can see the relationship between cause and effect. Like, it makes sense. This was, then something happened, now this is, but it's not radically different than the first. And you see where it came from. It's like, it's a progression. It's an evolution versus a revolution. Even that's not an accurate way of saying it. It's an evolution. Ila va'olol how things evolve one from the other. In the process of evolution, it's like links in a chain, where even though if you start off all the way at the beginning and you look at all the way at the end, it might seem radical, but you can trace it even backwards, step by step by step by step up, and see how you got to where you are from where you were. You with me on this? It's like a ladder. It's like rungs on a ladder. You were on the ground, now you're on the roof. How'd you get up there? There's a ladder. I'm not climbing that ladder, but there's a ladder there. So, anyway, anybody with me on not climbing a ladder onto the roof?
Yeah.
All right, fine. All right. I know lots of people that don't mind, but that's not for me. I'll take the stairs inside and look out the window. Point is like this. There's a way to trace it back up. Ila va'ol is a form of producing something that's not radically different than the antecedent. Antecedent? Yes? Yes. So you have the antecedent. What's the opposite? What's the
consequence?
Decedent? Wait, is that not good? Decedent? Not decedent? No, that's someone. Huh? Precedes. I know antecedent, but what's the other thing called?
Right, yeah.
Who knows? At this point, it doesn't matter. So, the result. So you have so in Ila va'olol, this is very important to know. There's two constructs, and they both are at play in the universe. There's the wondrous process of yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, poof, and Ila va'ol, which is a progression, cause and effect.
Is that different from yesh me'yesh?
Yesh, no, it could be the same thing. Yesh me'yesh, something from something. But Ila va'ol implies that yesh me'yesh still sounds like it's almost the same thing. Something and something. Ila va'ol implies cause and effect, so it's a little bit different, but it's still not radically different. It's not different enough that you can't see its relation to the thing, to its antecedent. That one I know. Right? To the thing that preceded it. You can see it. When you look at the first, you can see how the second evolved. When you look at the second, you can see how it came from the first. In other words, when you look at it both ways, forward and backwards, you can see the relationship between the two. Like, for example, the example I gave before about meditation. When you talk about using the mind to produce an emotion, that's ila va'ol. It's not that the emotion is coming out of nowhere. Whoa, I had no idea that emotion came out of nowhere. If you and I are feeling something, it's always because something happened in the head. There was always an idea or a thought in the mind that produced a feeling in the heart. Sometimes we have an uneasy feeling and we don't know why. But if you think about it, it's because we had like almost a subconscious thought in our minds that produced that, deeper feeling in the heart. But it's always, according to Kabbalah, the feeling of the heart is always produced by something of the mind. That's ila va'ol, cause and effect. The cause is the meditation in the mind, and the effect is the emotion in the heart. Mind, heart, ila va'ol. It makes sense. Now, it's not like one idea led to another idea. Maybe that's more like yesh me'yesh. It's not like an idea to another idea. That's too easy. Yeah, I started off with this idea, and then we moved to that idea. This is a new thing almost. An emotion, a feeling from an idea, that's different, but it's still close. Are you with me on this? You could say that it's something from nothing, that it's a creation of a new thing. Kabbalah comes along and says it's not a creation of a new thing. It's still close. And it's produced by, I wasn't going to say created, but it's produced by closeness. Right? It's produced by proximity. Because the idea is one that lends itself to emotion, and because emotions naturally are driven by ideas or thoughts, therefore one led to the other. So they're close to each other. Are you with me on this? This is another important piece. Ila va'olol is cause and effect. One leads to the other. They're close to each other. And it's logical that one produced the other. And the truth is, each one has a little bit of the other in it. Ideas also have a little bit of an emotion, and emotions have a little bit of ideas in them as well. There's a little bit of Yeah, we can understand it in different ways. But in Kabbalah it says there's midos shebemochin, there's emotions in intelligence, and mochin shebemidos, and intelligence in the emotions. What does it mean? Some ideas you like, some you don't like. Intellectually, some you're attracted to and some you're not attracted to, even intellectually. Before you feel it in the heart, the mind gets more excited intellectually about certain ideas than not, which means there's a chesed and gevura dynamic, a closeness or a rejection even in the mind. So there's emotions in the mind. That's one way of understanding it. The point is, we don't necessarily have to drill down into what it means, but the point is that there is a proximity between the two. Although one is an idea and one is an emotion, there is proximity between the two, there's a closeness between the two, and therefore one naturally produces the other.
When you say proximity, you're talking about a similarity, you're not talking about time and place.
Correct. There's a...
The cause and effect can be...
Correct.
Much more than just this happened and this happened and this happened.
Right. There's a commonality, there's a similarity between the two.
Okay.
So what he's saying here is that the creation of our universe, which happens yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, is radically different than the evolution of cause and effect. That's, again, the paragraph that begins with the letter A. So, moreover, creation of something from nothing is not the same as the relation between cause and effect. And let's jump into this. Let's continue. When we say cause and effect, in Hasidic writing it's called ila va'al. If you're wondering how to spell that, that's how you do it. We understand that the cause is enclosed in the effect, and the effect is conscious of the cause. Yeah? I'll say that again. The cause is enclosed in the effect. Let's talk about ideas and feelings. In your feeling, the idea is embedded in your feeling. Because why are you feeling that way if not for that idea? You're upset about something, right? Why are you upset? Because you understand something that happened in a certain way. By the way, how many times have we been upset about something and then found out new information that explains what happened and we're not upset anymore? What does that tell us? Or got more upset. What does it tell us? Right. That's an optimist. There's always more. Right.
Your perception of your filter.
That tells you that what's fueling the emotion, even as the emotion is going on, it's the idea. The moment the idea changes, or the understanding changes, the emotion can change also. Because the emotion is not its own creature. The emotion is a thing, but inside of it, it's being driven by, powered by, not Intel, not Apple, not even Google. What's it powered by? Ideas. Or the way you understand something to be. A thought that you have. So the emotion, right, so the idea, the ilah, the cause, is enclosed within the effect. And the effect is conscious of the cause. The effect, the emotion, again, I'm just giving one example of you, is aware of the cause. There is thus a basic relationship between the two. I'm back inside. By contrast, in the case of creation of something from nothing, there is an unbridgeable gulf between the source, the creator, God, and the result, the object created. When we talk about something from nothing, there's no closeness there. It's not like, it was so close, the nothingness was almost something, and then you have something. No, that's not something from nothing. You with me on this? Yeah, if I take, I don't know, I'm just trying to use something physical.
But it's kind of hard to differentiate those things. Like, I mean, because technically speaking, wouldn't or Ein Sof be in everything? I mean, God's Spirit is like in everything. So,
he's going to get back to that in a second.
Right, like
good.
God kind of created things from himself, kind of, to a certain extent, right?
So hold on one second. He's going to get back to that point a little bit later to show the paradox of something from nothing.
Right.
How it's infinitely vast. The gulf is infinitely vast. At the same time, it's infinitely close.
Yeah.
And that's going to be another of the incredible features of this creation, which is meant to just awaken within our hearts just this majesty of how this is all happening.
Right.
That's the end result. But let's jump back into this initial contrast. And we're not going to be able to finish this entire conversation today. We'll pick it up next week, please God. But I don't want to leave this in the middle of a concept. The idea here is that yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, and il va'ol, cause and effect, are radically different ways of producing something new. Right? So you go from an idea to an emotion. That's a new emotion, but it's not so new. You see, the idea was kind of along the lines of that emotion, because after all, that's what literally led to that emotion. Right? When you're thinking about how much good that person did for you, so you feel gratitude in your heart, that makes sense, because meditations of goodness lead to feelings of gratitude. That makes sense, right? One leads to the other. It's in the same sandbox, so to speak. So although one's an idea and one's a feeling, all right, this one led to that. The cause is still somewhat in the effect can still see the cause. It's all tightly connected. When it comes to something from nothing, the nature of that process is, again, there's only one example of that, because not in our human experience, it's God's creation of the universe. When you have something from nothing, you're not dealing with a source that is relatable to the new thing that was produced. That's why it's literally being called something from nothing. If it was relatable, it would be called ilav al, cause and effect. The fact that it's cause, in other words, the definition of something from nothing means that there's nothing discernible in the source that leads us to the place of the result or of the outcome. There's nothing that could have predicted that this would come out from that. That was nothing, and this is something now. No, there's no closeness to it. And the something looks out at the source and says, it just seems blank and vast. There's nothing relatable. Like there's nothing that that makes sense. Doesn't make sense. It's beyond anything. It's infinitely vast.
So spontaneous, basically. Like God didn't need a cause to create the universe. He just did it.
Yeah,
he didn't say I did it because of this reason. It's just like it.
It's not only the because piece of it. It's also that there's nothing. You don't have the substantive source that then evolves into the world. You do have a process of evolution, say there's shashla, but that's once the first creation, if you will, happens, then there's an evolutionary process within, as Kabbalah describes it. But that initial creation is something from nothing. There was nothing of this sort, and now there is something of this sort.
If we don't know what the
yeah. He says that right here. The divine creative force is hidden and is not enclosed in the creature, as in the case of cause and effect. We don't see the source. We can't see the source. The source is hidden. That's the nature of the creation. The nature of creation is that there is this gap. Fast
That what
gap.
creates existential angst. I don't know if I'm completely following you 100%, but existential angst, it's just that uneasy feeling that most people have, and then we plug in the ideas of what's causing it. Oh, it's because I don't have this, or I don't have that, or I need this. I don't know if I'm following you, but can you answer? I once heard a scholar speak about the origins within Adam and Eve. Adam came from nothing. His fear is that he's going to revert to nothingness. Right. He's at the precipice of, which is why men need to feel accomplished. This was, I don't necessarily buy it as it manifests, but that's what this person was saying. Whereas Eve in the narrative, at least one of the narratives in Genesis, comes from Adam. So there's no fear of not being. The fear is not having own identity. Maybe it's not a fear, but the challenge there is not feeling that I may just be irrelevant, but it's that I need to wanting to forge my own identity, separate, distinct, right? Again, I don't know if that's a thing. That was one person's insight, but the notion of existential angst, because there's a blank slate beyond, that's something that I've heard be posited. So can I say it definitively without seeing it in a source? Not necessarily, but I hear what you're saying. Well, we're talking about like thoughts creating emotions, but sometimes there's that uneasiness that creates the thoughts. Yeah.
So let's close it out here before we get to the paradox, because we're already at the time. So what I want to talk. So I want to kind of recap and tie it together as much as we have. It's going to be a loose tie because we haven't put all the pieces together. We're far from it. We're in the middle of this meditation. And but it's important that we hold the ideas together so that next week we can, take off the packaging and jump right back in. What we talked about today is, number one, the notion of ego potentially messing up even the most beautiful things. And beautiful things that come from a place of ego maybe aren't so beautiful. That was the first point. The second point was, this is also true when it comes to spiritual service and even meditation, spiritual meditations. That we can mess it up by making it about us and not about the truth. Then we talked about meditation being a form of focusing on an idea to the point that it produces an emotion. We then spoke about or introduced a meditation that the end result is joy and excitement. And we started building that by saying, how do we get to that emotion of joy and excitement? It's through meditating on, generally speaking, the greatness of God. How do we meditate on the greatness of God? What does that mean? Because that's a very theoretical concept that is probably not going to produce an emotion. If I tell you, think about the greatness of God, that's probably not going to do anything for you over here. So we have to really break that down. What does that actually mean, the greatness of God? Right? So he's breaking it down by talking about, first of all, let's talk about, forget God for a second. Don't forget God. But put God aside. Don't put God aside. But let's focus on how marvelous the creation is. If you want to know about the greatness of God, well, let's start with God's creation. So how does God create? Yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing. Nothing and then something. That's incredible. That's miraculous. It's not like il va'ol, which makes sense. It's not a logical, progressive form of, I have this and then this produces that. That's logical. Yesh mi'ayin means it's illogical. And it's not a close form of creation. It's a very distant form of creation. That's what we're up to. The paradox is, as we're about to say in the next paragraph, which we're not going to study today, but I'm going to, what's the word? Not project. Tease? Yeah, preview. That's coming soon to a Kabbalah class near you. The paradox is that in Yesh Me'ayin, you have to have the divine creative force always in the thing that you're creating, whereas when it comes to Ilaval, you don't need the thing in the thing. Bob Ross can take his paint. It sounds like it's going to end a different way. He can take his paint and put it on the canvas. I only meant this in a positive way. And create a masterpiece and walk away. And guess what? It's still there. When it comes to, because yesh me yesh, ilava'ol, the product doesn't need the source. Even if it's still influenced somewhat, like we said, emotions and intellect, it doesn't need it. It doesn't need that proximity. Whereas when it comes to yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, although it's vast, there's a vast gap between the two. That infinitely unbridgeable gap needs to constantly be bridged by the divine force being inside the creation, as you mentioned, in order for it to keep on going, which is a topic we're going to explore next week. So, where does this leave us today? It leaves us with a lot to think about and a lot to recognize. So, I'll leave you with this: the power of our thoughts, the power of our mind. We live in a society where, and this is what I was trying to say before, where we are bombarded by ideas, bombarded by thoughts, bombarded by messages. We need to be in control and choose what we are going to think about. Just because it's there, or just because someone else wants you to think about it, doesn't mean you have to think about it. Don't be a slave. Don't be, I don't know if slave is the right term. Don't be, hey Shalom. This is my son Shalom. He's 11. He's next, by the way. Oh, thank you for sharing that with me. I don't even know what that means, but I think I do. So, yeah. We don't need to be a slave to the messages that are put out there. Just because someone has their agenda doesn't mean it has to be our agenda. And I've said this countless times, but you wake up in the morning and the first thing you do, if we wake up in the morning, the first thing we do is tune into the news and we hear about how horrible the world is and how horrible everything is. then of course you're going to feel that. If those are the ideas that are being put out there, of course we're going to start feeling unease, or feeling like the world is terrible, and maybe even our lives, God forbid, are not so happy. Of course. What else? How else are we going to feel if those are the ideas in our heads? Instead of that, study some of this or whatever. Study something positive and goodness affirming. Study some Torah. Study some Kabbalah. It's good for you. Like God told Moses, take 2 tablets and call me in the morning. All right. Thank you very much.